I don't make a point of shitting on people's front lawns, but on this particular Vancouver winter evening, I sincerely just couldn't help myself. Earlier in autumn, I couldn't find housing for my pit bull puppy and I when I had moved back to Vancouver, and moreover, I was a student, so my budget was pretty low. And although my mom offered for us to live with her, I really wanted to venture out on my own. So I started looking into the van life. And for those of you that don't know what the van life is, let me tell you, it's where you live in a van. You see, this was rapidly becoming the most feasible option in my mind. The cost of entry was high, but I was good at navigating Craigslist and managed to find a motorhome a short ferry ride away for $2,000. Because it was so cheap, it required some work, but I was up for the challenge. The inaugural trip to get back to the city was memorable to say the least. I found out that my RV couldn't go faster than 80 kilometers an hour, that old tires will break if you go over small potholes, and that you should never forget to close the windows above the bed when it's raining outside. But I fell in love with taking little ferries to remote islands, living by the idea that if I didn't make the ferry, I could just sleep in the RV. No matter where I went, I was in no rush and everywhere was home. And at the end of the first day, after having missed a boat, my dog and I watched the most beautiful and pink and orange and glorious and solitary sunset hit the mountains and the ocean. It was surreal and I felt truly free. Those were the great points about the RV. The bad points included a couple of things. For one, it was cold. It was super cold. And after that inaugural trip, I had to stay overnight at an uncle's house because the tires were going to be longer to install than expected. I quickly thanked the gods for my uncle because the weather changed, and it started to snow that day. I learned that my RV, now named Tony, did in fact have propane heating when it was plugged into a power source. I learned also that, yeah, Tony could power my laptop when it was plugged into a power source, and I learned a fateful lesson about toilets. Mine didn't work. So a few days later, back on the mainland, I set out to find the perfect spot in Kitsilano. There was some criteria that needed to be met to be the perfect spot. First of all, I needed to be close to a bus stop. Check. I was a full-time student at UBC. I wanted to be able to get to and from school real quick. Second, I needed to be around a Starbucks or a coffee shop that I could sit in for a couple hours to charge my laptop and do homework. Power source. And lastly, but fatefully important, it needed to be near a bathroom. I thought I had found the perfect place. I set up right beside a house that was being built on West 12th in McDonald. It was perfect because since they were building, the construction crew had left a porta potty until one day I came home and that porta potty was gone. The construction was being finished. I thought to myself, well, I'm just gonna go study at Starbucks anyway. I'll just go to the bathroom there before I come back to Tony. I was wrong to have been so flippant. At 11:30 p.m., I need to fucking poop. I needed to poop badly. Frantically shutting Tony's door, I start sweating and pacing around the blocks in Kitsilano, just looking for something that would be open so I could do a number 2. Quickly, I learned no business was open for my business. My next course of action was an alleyway, but for some stupid reason, every time I found a decent place, either a car would drive down the lane or someone was walking their dog, and I was so visible. I felt like I had been walking for forever. Everywhere I went, I was so completely visible. But then I came upon this cute little house. Its front yard was enclosed, almost like a natural bathroom stall by trees and shrubs and gate. It was beckoning me. I really needed to poop. I really had not thought this out, but this cute little house and its front yard were really going to be my best bet. Thoughts were racing through my mind, and I had to ignore everything for the main and most pressing goal here. I started to test the waters by pulling my pants up and down a bit halfway from my butt, and then back up until I truly felt the coast was clear, and I began to pull my pants down, and then from behind me, toward the front door of the cute little house came, "Hey! What are you doing?" Luckily, I was still struggling with my pants, so I looked like your average normal stranger standing in someone's front yard in the dark. I couldn't figure out what to reply. My mind was racing, so I'm picking up my dog's poop. No dog anywhere in sight. But for some reason, the homeowner didn't question it further, lucky, probably, or happy to have me gone. I guess he had been sitting in his front room reading a book in dull light, literally watching as I trotted into his front yard, trotted into his front yard. So I pulled out a plastic bag from my pocket. I picked up a imaginary dog poo on the front lawn. They said thank you. I said I'm sorry. And I walked off into the night, still needing to take a giant poo.
It's sunset in the Australian desert, and I'm watching it from on top of a hill with my best friend Tallis. There's a music festival happening below us, but neither of us want to be part of it. And as we watch the colors cast over the landscape, we're having our usual discussion. What the heck are we doing with our lives? For years now, I've been wandering, traveling, adventuring, and it had been fun. Beach parties, hiking mountains, scuba diving. But after years and years of it, without structure in my life, it had come at a cost. And while other friends of mine were becoming engineers and architects and designers, I was continuing to go from place to place, not really knowing what I was doing, even though it had been fun. But at this point, I was just exhausted and just wanted to go home. Except home didn't exist anymore. After all the wandering and packing up and moving and temporary relationships and temporary jobs, home was gone. I didn't have a place in the world that I could go, and I felt like I was still living like a little kid. And Taos was the same. And so here we are trying to figure out how we stop being nomadic wandering hippies and somehow become adults. What do adults do that nomadic wandering hippies don't do? File taxes? Buy insurance? We don't know. We're at a loss. And yeah, and we're confused about it, discussing back and forth. What the heck do adults do? And me and Taos are trying to come up with a solution to this. What's something that we could buy, a physical item that we could put in our room perhaps, that's something that adults would have? Because until this point, all of my possessions are things pretty much that I found in free piles on the side of the street. Like the sweatshirt in my backpack I found on a bench at a bus stop. I mean, it's a perfectly good sweater. Had a few globs of paint on it, but otherwise fine. And so, not a sweater, something bigger than that, but nothing outrageous like a washing machine. That would be too much. Let's not go crazy. And then we come up with it, the perfect item. Something that says, yeah, you're going to stay here for a bit, but you can't just put it in a backpack and run off. A printer. Right? Nomadic wandering hippies don't have printers. Adults have printers. To print, I don't know, adult things? Tax forms? Insurance papers? We don't know, but we're going to find out. And we suddenly both get really excited about having a printer. So we pull out our journals and we start sketching our printers in color markers, because these printers are going to print all the colors of the rainbow. We are going to manifest printers. Because that's what adults do, right? You manifest printers. And I'm looking out at the sunset, but also my mind is starting to wander. And I imagine myself walking into Staples. And I walk to the printer aisle, and all the sales staff come running to come help me. This printer? Oh no, not these cheap ones. The ones at the end of the aisle. And I walk down past the bubble jets and past the inkjets, all the way to the end, to the Mega Super Color Laser 4000. That's the printer. With all the sales staff cheering me on, I slap down my Visa card. That's the printer for me. And I walk out of Staples with all the staff still cheering, with my new printer and my new life. My mind comes back and I look over at Talis and suspect she's been having a similar vision. We nod at each other. A printer? Yeah, a printer. Well, a few months pass and I find myself back here in Vancouver. I've found a job and it's okay. And I'm living at a house with a few people who are friendly enough. Still looking for home though. And one afternoon after work, I'm walking home and I pass Staples and I remember. So I walk in and I go down the printer aisle. But there's no fanfare, no sales staff are running over to cheer me on. And I'm looking at the printers and I think, well, I should get one. But they're kind of expensive. And what the heck am I going to do with a printer? So I slowly turn around and walk out the door. And on my way home, just before I reach my house, I noticed that my neighbor across the street has put a box out onto the curb. Is that what I think it is? I pick it up and I spin it over a few times. The HP PhotoSmart 275. It looks like all the pieces are here. I bring it home and I plug it in and the lights are doing some weird flashing thing, so I mash it a couple times and then the green light goes steady. So I connect it to my computer, pull up a random document and hit Control-P. And the printer starts making these strange chugging sounds and I think, oh, it must be broken. But then all of a sudden I see the paper start to feed into it with a and the paper is going further and further, cha-choom, cha-choom, and it's starting to come out the other end towards me, cha-choom, cha-choom, and I can see that the ink has kind of dried out a little bit, cha-choom, cha-choom, and it's a little bit off-centered, cha-choom, cha-choom, but as the piece of paper comes towards me with a cha-choom, cha-choom, I smile, and as it gets closer and closer, cha-choom, cha-choom, in that brief little moment of time, cha-choom, cha-choom, as it keeps coming towards me. Cha-choom, cha-choom. In that brief little moment of time, I'm home.
For years, my friend Alec and I went out together every Tuesday evening. We'd be doing so still if Alec hadn't moved to Albania. In the beginning, we always went to the Fountainhead on Davy, equidistant from our two apartments. We'd sit on the patio and over a couple of pitchers of pale ale, plus a bowl of cheesy fries, we'd discuss work, life, parenting, parents, the past, the future, and everything in between. Alec liked to say, sometimes the bear eats you, sometimes you eat the bear. We'd compare notes on who'd eaten whom that day, that week. After a while, we decided to change it up. The conversations stayed the same, but the venues were different. Upscale or downscale, a Legion, a brew pub, a cocktail bar, Kits, downtown, East Van, but never east of Maine. One week, we found ourselves at the 1927 Lobby Lounge in the then newly renovated Hotel Georgia. If you don't know it, this small bar, hidden away, is relaxed at the best of times and downright comatose on a Tuesday night. You can talk and hear yourself think. No TVs, no pipe music. The drinks were good. We liked it. We were sitting up at the bar, which is only 3 or 4 stools, making it easy to chat to the bartender. We exchanged notes with him about Vancouver's cocktail scene, casually asking for suggestions of other places we might like. Otherwise, we remained immersed in our usual petty concerns and complaints. But just as we were leaving, he presented us with a small square of hotel notepaper on which he neatly printed a list of 15 bars and restaurants. Above, he'd written, with a bit of a flourish, Derek's Top Picks. Alec and I now had a challenge, a mission to give structure to our weekly ramblings. We knew we had to visit every bar on the list. We thanked Derek and stumbled off. Over the next few months, we weren't systematic. We took our time and periodically returned to more familiar haunts. But gradually, we made our way around all of Derek's top picks. I was the keeper of the piece of paper, so when I proposed to Alec a new place to meet, I tell him, it's on the list. Derek's recommendations were eclectic. High-end restaurants, dedicated cocktail lounges, as well as places with few pretensions. Some were busy, full of hipsters, others quiet and laid back. Some specialized in classic cocktails, others boasted creative innovations, but they all made great drinks. We often chatted to the bar staff. At first, we'd explain our mission and the fact that Derek had recommended them. Everyone knew him, esteemed him highly. Bartenders felt honored to be on his list. But we soon discovered we had no need to offer excuses for our presence. Cocktails are back in fashion. Vancouver, as we know, has a vibrant community of mixers and drinkers. Finally, mission accomplished. We had tried all 15 of Derek's top picks. Hard to choose between them. Favorites included the Diamond, the Clue Club, the Kiefer Bar. But it was time to report back. On yet another Tuesday, we headed to the Hotel Georgia. We were disappointed to find Derek absent. We asked after him, but we were told he'd moved on. He was no longer with the hotel. The barman wasn't sure where he was now. We exchanged a few words about this oddity, but left it at that. Only when the barman left for a few minutes did another punter sitting at the bar turn to us and half whisper, "He doesn't want to say so, but Derek's dead." Nobody knows exactly how or why, but they think it was suicide. And so it turned out. Derek van der Heide, the bar manager of the 1927 Lobby Lounge, had died at his own hand while we were still following his list. Sometimes the bear eats you. He was 36 years old. The mixology community was in shock. There's now a trophy awarded in Derek's honor, and of course a cocktail in his name, featuring bourbon, rum, and anise liquor. For Alec and for me, our brief encounter with Derek gave us his list, his knowledge of the local bar scene, and his passion for cocktails, which helped us rediscover the city. His spirits, guided us. There's a coda to this story, which I first wrote up on my blog. 3 years later, a comment arrived from someone named Joan. It says, "Although I have read this article several times, it continues to give me comfort. I'm Derek's aunt and miss him a lot. Thank you for noticing him."
Have you ever imagined there's someone else in your head? I don't mean something spiritual, and I'm not talking about split personality or anything like that. But sometimes I like to pretend that someone I know, or someone I know of, is temporarily inhabiting my head, watching my experiences through my eyes, occasionally giving me advice or feedback, but with me through my ups and downs. Like, for example, sometimes I imagine it's someone from the past, like William Shakespeare, transported suddenly 400 and some odd years into the future and suddenly finding himself in the head of a middle-aged Vancouverite in 2019, wondering what's with the motor cars and electronic music. Or maybe it's an old boyfriend who definitely misses me still. But for several years, when I was in my late teens and early 20s, the person in my head, day after day, was a 5-year-old boy named Colby. I'm from a small town in the interior. It's called Sicamous. It's on the Shuswap Lake. And Colby was one of several children in a large farming family that lived up there. I remember him clearly. He was 5 years old. Blonde hair, white blonde, and a dark suntan with even darker freckles across his nose. And I remember him in a red bathing suit, and he still had a round baby belly. And I remember him in a bathing suit because I taught him swimming lessons in the last summer that I lived there when I was 17 years old. My brother and I taught swimming lessons for several summers, but this summer in particular was the last one before I left Sicamous for good and came down here to go to university. After lessons one day, my brother and I were standing on the dock, talking to friends, and I looked over to my right and I saw, floating face down in the water, I saw Colby. Now, I was a swimming instructor, and I'd also taken lifeguard courses, and I'd taken plenty of first aid, and I knew exactly what to do. But I didn't do it, because I was afraid Colby was dead already. And I was afraid it was my fault. But fortunately, I did remember to scream, and I did scream, and my brother didn't hesitate. He jumped in the water and he lifted Colby out and he carried him to the beach and he gave him artificial respiration. And I couldn't watch. I did not want to be there for this. So I said, I will call an ambulance. And I ran away because in those days you had to find a payphone for that kind of thing. And it seemed like a very long time because of course while I was running I didn't know if he was alive or if he was dead. But it was probably only 15 minutes that I returned and Colby was sitting up and he was coughing and his mother was holding him in her arms and she was crying and he's surrounded by people and my brother was taking charge beautifully. I called the ambulance, I said. So as I say, I moved away that September, and in fact my whole family left Sicamous. I came down here to go to SFU, where I spent several years growing up. And during that time, Colby was a frequent visitor to my head. He was with me for ups and downs, he watched my experiences with me, he was a companion to talk to. And you know, I wondered about him a lot. It was before the days of social media and constant connectivity. And I really wasn't in touch with his parents or anything, and I thought about him and I wondered, what did he remember about that day? How did it change him? Did he think about me? And did he know how I failed him that day? His uncle, Bob, was at university with me and we were friendly, although we weren't close. And after several years here, we ended up making arrangements to carpool back to Sicamous for an event. And in the car on the way up, I thought, oh, this is my chance. I'll catch up. I'll find out what happened to Colby, what he's up to. And so I asked. And Bob said, oh, I guess you didn't hear. Colby died. He'd only lived a couple of months after that day at the beach. He'd run in front of a car, and he was killed instantly. Of course, it was a terrible shock. The little boy, this fantastic little boy, to think he was dead. But it was also very disconcerting to think that this person I'd been imagining and this person I'd been having conversations with in my head all this time did not exist and had not existed for many years. I'm a mother now, and although I certainly think of Colby often, I find I more often think of his mother and what it must have been like for her to lose her child that day. And I also think about the person who hit him with her car. I don't know anything about her except I know it was a woman, but I suspect Colby is in her head too.